so excited for you all to be here. Bear with me while I figure out this live streaming thing. This is my third time doing these weekly lives where I go over the freshest Redfin weekly housing market data. I talk about current events in the economy. I talk about how the housing market is impacting the economy, how the economy is impacting the housing market. So thank you for tuning in. Now I'm going to be sharing my screen so that you can see all these lovely articles that I'm going to be talking about. Let me just, there we go. Let's see. Let me share my screen, or just making sure I got everything. Oh, you got everything going here. All right. Make this smaller. Okay. So the first thing I am going to be talking about is our latest Redfin housing market data. And the big news this week in the housing market is that new listings are down. They fell 1%, which might not sound like a lot, but it is one of the biggest declines we've seen all year in terms of home sellers listing their homes for sale. So why is this happening? Like, we always talk about what's going on with buyers and how they are being impacted by mortgage rates. But mortgage rates going up in this type of housing market is actually impacting sellers just as much as it is impacting buyers. And the reason why sellers are so rate sensitive nowadays, when they never really used to be all that rate sensitive, is because so many homeowners locked in to record low mortgage rates during the pandemic. Let me just go to Freddie Mac so you can see this. It's always good to just to have the data in front of us when we're talking about what's happening. All right, let's go back 10 years. It's been so long since the pandemic. Can you believe it's been more than 5 years since we entered into lockdown? I have to go to the 10-year view in order to see the full story of what happened to mortgage rates. Okay, so during the pandemic 2020, mortgage rates fell. I mean, they were pretty low in retrospect before the pandemic. Back in 2018, mortgage rates reached their highest point in the last 10 years at 4.8% for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. They were falling before the pandemic, but then the pandemic hit and they just fell to these record low rates. Bottomed out at like 2.9ish, 2.8% for a 30-year fixed rate. And they increased at their fastest pace on record. So anybody who was buying a home or already owned a home in 2020, 2021, all the way through the first part of 2022, they were able to get a rock bottom mortgage rate. And this isn't just impacting the people who were buying homes during the pandemic. Everybody who owned a home, if they wanted to, they could have refinanced. And if you didn't, you are probably regretting it every day since that you did not get this cheap debt. I mean, maybe there's ways to justify it. You just don't want to have debt. That's valid. But you could have gotten really cheap money during the pandemic. But money is not cheap anymore. Money is expensive, at least most expensive it's been in the last 10 years. We say money is expensive. What we're really talking about is the cost of borrowing being expensive. Now, mortgage rates are up to 6.48%. You can see that there was this dip that happened in the beginning of the year, but then they shot up. They shot up because we went to war with Iran, and they've remained high ever since. Now, myself and other housing market economists, we were predicting that like this was the peak of mortgage rates and they would slowly come back down. Maybe they would never get back down to even 4% just because we're in a very different kind of economy now than we were pre-pandemic, but maybe they would get to 5%. And that would, be enough to kind of even out the housing market. The mortgage rates remain high, but all of the homeowners, they have mortgage rates from down here. So if they were to sell, they would have to give up these rock bottom mortgage rates. And if they wanted to buy again, they would have to buy at these mortgage rates that are nearly double what they currently have. And for like a $500,000 home, if you were to sell a $500,000 home, let's say you live in West LA and you want to move to, I don't know, Silver Lake. You don't really want to upgrade your home. Maybe you want to get a bigger home in Silver Lake because Silver Lake homes are less expensive. I'm talking about LA. This is very LA centric because I'm from LA. But if you were to move across town, buy the same price home, and you got a mortgage on that home, the mortgage payment, like you're taking out the same amount of debt, the mortgage payment could be $1,000 more than what you are currently paying each month. Each month, $1,000 more. Now, you probably gained a lot of equity in your home, so maybe you could put a lot of equity towards that next home, and that would kind of dampen the amount of interest that you would have to take on, the amount of debt you would have to take on. But a lot of homeowners are doing this math of like what it would cost for them to stay in their homes versus what it would cost for them to sell and buy again. And the math, as the kids say, the math ain't mathin'. So this explains why new listings are falling. Mortgage rates went up. We're seeing a decline in pending sales, indicating that buyers are backing off. They're not making as many offers. That's what pending sales is. It's when you make an offer on a home. It's when the home gets accepted. It goes pending. We're seeing fewer of those ever since mortgage rates went up. And now we're also seeing new listings falling because this mortgage rate impact is impacting both sellers and buyers. Now, the flip side of this, which makes me a little bit optimistic, is that one day mortgage rates will fall. One day this war will be over and the Strait of Hormuz will reopen. And when that happens, mortgage rates will fall. Now, in the past, when mortgage rates fell, it just resulted in higher prices because it would bring buyers back to the market, but sellers wouldn't care. This housing market, sellers do care. Sellers are rate sensitive. So if mortgage rates were to fall, we would see both sellers and buyers return to the market. And with an increase in homes for sale at the same time that there are an increase in buyers, we could see more homes sold without prices going up, with mortgage rates being lower, which would improve affordability. But in order for that to happen, mortgage rates have to fall first. And in order for that to happen, that Strait of Hormuz, it needs to reopen. So even though, I'm not the kind of person that follows international politics, I focus on the US housing market, I have to pay attention to what is happening in Iran because the longer that strait stays closed, the longer the housing market is stuck and the longer housing just kind of remains unaffordable, both to buy it and even to sell it. It is unaffordable for homeowners to sell. Very strange. You think they'd be set, but this is the strange dynamic of the housing market that we are in. Okay, before I move on to the next piece of news, let me just check in on comments. If anybody has any comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. I see somebody said that they switched jobs 4 times since 2020. That's cool. All right, but I'm gonna move on to the next piece of news that I'm interested in talking about. So out of Redfin news, what we are seeing is that sellers are pulling their homes off the market at near record rates as buyers reject high prices. And this ties exactly into what I was talking about before, where home sellers don't want to give up their super cheap mortgages unless they're getting a lot of money for those mortgages, because the more money they get from buyers, that means they have more equity. And when they go to buy their next home, they can put that equity into the next home instead of having to take out debt to buy their next home. But they're not getting the prices that they want. And of course, they're not getting the prices that they want because buyers are also up against high mortgage rates. It's like, the high mortgage rates are screwing everybody over, sellers and buyers. So sellers are taking the ball and going home, taking their home off the market at near record rates. Let's look at the historical pattern so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So delistings of homes for sale. This is the share of homes that are on the market that have been delisted, that were taken off the market. And you can see that there was this huge spike in 2020, which makes sense because 2020 was a crazy time. We were getting sent home from work. Everybody was just totally paranoid about COVID and also what COVID would do to the economy. And nobody wanted to sell their home in the middle of a pandemic, have strangers walking through their home in the middle of the pandemic. So delistings surged. But look at where they are now. They were at 6.3% in 2020. They're back up to 5.8%. Now, there are a lot fewer homes for sale. So we're talking about volume, then there aren't as many delistings. We're looking at share of listings that are being delisted. That's almost as high as it was at the height of the pandemic. And I think this just goes to show like the housing market is messed up. It is not, the market isn't clearing. The market is not healthy. Sales aren't happening. Sellers are delisting. They're acting like there's a crisis going on, like it's a pandemic, even though there's not. And it's just goes to show that the housing market is not in a healthy place because of this gap between the mortgage rates that sellers have and the mortgages that buyers can get. So there's this disconnect between sellers and the buyers. Sellers want high prices to justify them giving up their really cheap mortgages, and buyers want low prices because they're having to pay the high mortgages to even buy the homes in the first place. So in the existing home market, like things are just very, very stuck. They've been stuck since late 2022, coming up on 4 years now of just the housing market stuck. New construction is different though, because builders, they don't delist their homes. They're not living in their homes. They're not consuming their homes. They just want to sell them as quickly as possibly, which means that we're actually seeing the most delistings happening in strong buyers markets like Atlanta and Los Angeles. This is where the number of sellers vastly outnumbers number of buyers. There actually wasn't that much construction in Los Angeles, so I guess a lot of people are just selling their homes and getting out of Los Angeles. That's another way we can get sales happening, is if people just take all their equity out of a very expensive market and use it to buy in cash in a cheap market. That's probably why delistings are happening there, because they're having to compete against these sellers who are willing to take the lower prices. But in the Bay Area, people are relisting their home. And I talked about this last week, but it's worth repeating that there is a real estate boom happening in the Bay Area right now, being fueled by AI money. This is according to Redfin research. We can see that it's like super concentrated, the demand in the luxury market and in luxury neighborhoods. And when we talk to our Redfin agents, they're saying that it is people with AI money with big, what do you call them? Signing bonuses, $500,000 signing bonuses, stock. It's probably going to get even crazier when these AI companies IPO, and that's coming up. But it's already started. And there's this boom happening in Bay Area. It seems like sellers there are excited that they are getting the prices that they want and they are relisting. But if we scroll down to where delistings are super common, that's interesting. San Jose, Los Angeles, Dallas, and Seattle. Dallas makes sense because there's a lot of new construction. So if they have to compete against new construction, but I guess that kind of lowers the share because the new construction people aren't delisting. The existing homeowners might be delisting, but they're kind of being washed out by the new construction. But Seattle's a weak market compared to San Francisco. San Jose is also weak, but San Jose is like on a different trajectory. San Jose is like a year ahead of San Francisco, and it'll be interesting to see if they get more demand once these AI companies IPO, if that starts fueling demand and they start coming back to the market, these sellers, the way that the San Francisco sellers are coming back and relisting their homes. So this is an emerging story, I would say. It's just super remarkable how many sellers are delisting their homes, how that's hit a record high. But then we look at relistings, the people who delisted last year and are coming back to the market. Relistings are also up. You can see that relistings went up in 2022. A bunch of people pulled their homes off the market in March, but then like decided, oh wait, I can still sell my home during a pandemic. I'm going to relist in May. And some of the people who were delisting last year, they're relisting now too. So, people get skittish. They pull their home off the market. They list again, hoping they can get a better price. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. All right. Quick check-in on the comments. Get the likes up, people. Someone said get the likes up. Thank you for that. MRB 1004 over on TikTok. All right. Someone said that rents went up more. Oh yeah, rents are also up in the Bay Area. I think Apartment List put out a report about that. That's consistent with what we're seeing in the for sale market. That rents are just sky high in the Bay Area because of all the AI money. You see, whenever a company or an industry does well, I'm gonna get on my Georgist. My Georgist soapbox for a second. Here's Henry George. I'm gonna have him up while I talk a little bit about Georgism. So, what's so frustrating about the Bay Area housing market is that anytime the Bay Area's industry is doing really well, it all gets captured into land values, because the more productive the economy of the Bay Area is, the more people are earning money in the Bay Area. They have to live in the Bay Area. I mean, these companies sometimes they have some remote work, but they're more in office now. These workers, these people who are making all this money, they still want to live in the Bay Area and they need a place to live. So what ends up happening is that all this money is created in the Bay Area, but then all the people who get the money, they want a better apartment, they want a better house. There are essentially a fixed number of homes in the Bay Area because they do not build enough to meet the needs of their population. San Francisco is so notorious at not building. I think they only built like, I gotta look it up, but I want to say they only built like 40 new housing units last year. But I don't remember who was, yeah, I gotta look that up. Sorry. Anyway, Bay Area, they do not build enough housing. They're like the most NIMBY place on earth. So what ends up happening is that anytime wealth is created through technology, through industry, it ends up going to the landlords, the landowners, the homeowners. And what's super perverse about California is that they have Prop 13, and Prop 13 guarantees that if you own property, land in California, your property tax can only go up at most 2% each year. But land values historically have gone up like 13% each year. So the longer you own a home, the more subsidized your property taxes become. They're not subsidized for buyers. If you sell your home and buy again, or you're a first time buyer in California, you have to pay property taxes based on the value when you bought it. So the later you buy the home, the more you're paying in property taxes, which inherently disadvantages first time home buyers. It also disadvantages renters because renters don't get their rent capped. Not that I'm saying I want that. We could go on about why rent control is not the greatest policy, but regardless, it's super unfair that these longtime landholders, property holders in California get to capture all the value of California's economy, but they don't have to pay any more in tax. And Henry George, I have his picture up because he identified this problem even before, we had Silicon Valley, but it still is impacting California's housing market today, and it's still super unfair. And when these AI companies go public, owning land in California, that's going to be the golden ticket. It's not necessarily investing in OpenAI. It's owning property where the OpenAI employees want to live. Anyway, that's enough of that. I could talk about that all day. All right. Okay. Typical home buyers' down payments falls to $64,000 as Americans hold on to cash. So this is interesting. Like the way to navigate around the problem of the housing market right now, which is that interest rates are expensive, they are too high, is to pay in cash, because you pay in cash, you don't have to take on debt, you don't have to pay interest. And we saw a lot of cash purchases. Let me see if there's a graph. We saw cash purchases really go up once interest rates went up. There was a lot of cash purchases during the pandemic, but that's not because interest rates were high. That's because it was such a competitive market that the only way to win a bidding war against like 10 other people was to be the person offering cash, because sellers love cash offers because they think that they are more likely to close than offers that come with debt associated with them. So cash purchases started to take off during the pandemic. They went up even higher when interest rates went up. There's been some volatility, but right now they're down. This doesn't look like a lot. This kind of just looks like volatility, but it looks like at least the end of the dominance, or the end of the acceleration of cash purchases. We reached seemingly a cap on how many cash purchases the housing market can take, which makes sense. We've been in this state of high mortgage rates for how long has it been? 4 years now. So people who wanted to buy in cash, they probably already bought in cash. And the people who couldn't buy because they weren't in a position to buy yet, maybe their career wasn't the way they wanted it to be yet, maybe they weren't ready to buy because they wanted to wait to get married or wanted to wait to have kids or whatever life event. I think these cash buyers are kind of like they've reached their limit, and that's allowing some of these people who are really just trying to time their life and don't have the cash to buy to get into the market. So that's kind of a good thing. But on the other side, I guess the negative flip of that is that, oh, we have all these people taking on more debt at a time when the labor market maybe looks a little shaky. It doesn't look that shaky. But that would be like my pessimistic take. But I think this is more of an optimistic take, that if you are taking on debt, you don't have to compete against an ever-growing number of cash buyers. Okay, what else is in the news? Yeah, speaking of people tapping cash, this came out today from Fast Company. I'm gonna shout. I want to say the author because I always want to make sure to recognize these writers. Sarah Bregel at Fast Company wrote that more Americans than ever are tapping their 401ks for emergency cash. Okay, this is a little bit of an old article. It's from March 6th, but I saw this in my feed today, so it must be gaining traction again. But anyway, I guess this isn't old news, but it's new to me. A Vanguard report shows hardship withdrawals climbed to 6% last year, far above pre-pandemic levels as financial pressures mount and rules around early withdrawals loosen. So back in 2018, Congress passed a bill that made it easier for people to tap into their 401k savings for emergencies, for medical emergencies, for like domestic violence emergencies. That sounds good. If you're having an emergency and you need money and you got money sitting in a savings account, it's good that you have access to it. But it seems like there's been an uptick this year in terms of the number of people having to take those hardship withdrawals. And, economists, we're always thinking about the incentives. Like, how difficult really is it to say that you're going through a hardship when you're not really going through a hardship? Not that, like, I want to say these people are lying, but there is some degree of choice in terms of when you feel like you want to tap this money. Maybe you have other money set aside in savings, so you don't have to do a hardship withdrawal, even if you are in an emergency. Or maybe you don't have any money set aside, and now you have to kind of like fabricate an emergency in order to justify doing a hardship withdrawal. I'm not saying, come on, we're adults, right? People do that. But anyway, it's an indication that people don't have outside savings to tap when these hardship withdrawals increase. Assuming there hasn't been an uptick in people having exogenous emergencies, I think this indicates that people are running out of savings. And last week I talked about how the personal savings rate declined. So this is consistent with people just saving less and having to find money from other sources. So I think that's interesting. All right, what does the chat say? Hey, chat. Someone said Henry George mentioned. Yeah, Henry George. Georgism. I don't really like to glorify Henry George too much because he was, a person that lived 100 years ago, and who knows if he was a person I would be friends with or would be friends with me. But, recognizing that he created this movement that still exists over 100 years later, I think we can applaud that. Somebody else said San Francisco doesn't build many new properties. Yep, majority of properties are renovated in San Francisco. That's true. I was just talking to somebody about this. Oh, I was on a different podcast where they were asking me about flippers and how whenever our market is hot, people come in and take older properties, renovate them with very what do you call it? Cosmetic improvements, and then sell them for way more money. Part of the reason why that happens is because most home buyers do not feel like putting the work in themselves. They want a turnkey home. That's why if you're selling a home, it's a good idea to do that work yourself, so at least you can capture that value. But sometimes people die, people are having problems, they don't have money, they can't put those improvements into the home themselves. So they sell to a flipper who's going to offer a little bit more money than somebody like a regular home buyer. And that flipper puts in the work and then they resell it. But what ends up happening, which I think is what people get mad about, is that now there aren't more affordable homes on the market because the flippers took them. And now the prices are they jack up the prices. They put some work in, but they jack up the prices. And that increases the floor of entry into the housing market. There's also federal loan programs for first-time buyers where the government will give you money to buy a home that needs work to put the work in yourself. And I think those programs are good because it helps even the playing field between first-time home buyers and flippers. So if you're mad about the flippers and you feel like they're taking all your housing inventory, look into those loan programs. They exist for a reason. Okay. I got on a tangent there. Majority can't have kids or get married in California unless you are in tech. Yeah, no kidding. I grew up in LA and I liked being a kid in LA, being a teenager in LA. It was fun, but I'm not raising my kids in LA, obviously. I might be able to afford to if I really decided to spend all my money on a house and all my money buying a house in either like a good school district. But like, I just remember what the quality of life was. I would have to carpool from my neighborhood in Los Feliz, Silver Lake, to the Valley for middle school for like the magnet program good school because my neighborhood school wasn't good enough for what my parents thought I should get. And sitting in traffic every day, like I was in traffic every single day going back and forth from school. And the traffic is way, way, way worse now. So I couldn't do it. I couldn't live in California and raise kids, but you know, I understand the struggle if you are doing that. So you're making it work. So kudos to you. Because California is great in so many other ways. It's just really the traffic that sucks. And the traffic sucks because the housing sucks, because the housing is so sprawled out. But they're getting a subway. So maybe kids in the future, they can take the subway to school. That'd be cool. Anyway, done with my comments and tangents. Feel free to keep commenting though. I'll keep going on tangents with y'all. Okay. The other news that's happening in the economy right now does have to do with these IPOs. Let's see. Yeah, SpaceX is IPOing. I know OpenAI is IPOing, and they're going to be like the biggest IPOs in history. And it's going to create a lot of liquidity for these people who are benefiting from these IPOs. I have friends who worked for SpaceX. I went to MIT for undergrad, so I know a couple of people who have SpaceX stock that they have not been able to liquidate, and they're excited that this is happening. I'm not sure if they're going to be millionaires or not. I have to ask them, but they're going to have a lot of money. When people get money, they want to buy real estate. There's research that shows, I think that it's like a 0.8 elasticity, which means that for every 1% increase in income, for every 10% increase in income, people spend 8% more on housing. So it's almost a guarantee that a lot of this money that is going to be created in these public offerings is going to go right into the real estate market. It won't, like in the Bay Area, it'll probably be heavily concentrated. I have a feeling for like the SpaceX IPO, the people who worked for those companies for the last decade are dispersed across the country. So it's probably not going to like raise home prices in any one particular neighborhood or city. But for the OpenAI IPO and some of these more San Francisco based IPOs that are all happening all at once, it's probably going to show up in San Francisco Bay Area home prices, home values competition. So that's something to watch out for. But I think it's just like interesting economic news in general that these IPOs are so humongous. I could go on about how like these IPOs are happening later and later, and if you buy money when these IPOs, or sorry, you should use real words. If you buy stock in these companies, it's definitely not a guarantee that it's going to go up in value. It used to be that you kind of like get in early and then there's some risk associated, but there's a huge reward. These companies are IPOing so late that I feel like the reward of buying stock at the stage of the IPO is just so diminished at this point. But I think a lot of people just believe in these companies. They like that these companies have excellent name brand value. They're in the news every single day. We're hearing about these companies, how they're going to change the world, whether you believe it or not. So like that alone is probably going to bring a lot of investment into these companies and justify these numbers that they're putting out. And if they successfully get these valuations that are this humongous, then all these companies are going to be showing up in index funds, which are the diversified stock funds that try to mimic the entire stock market. And they do that by buying proportional shares of the largest stocks in the United States. And this is what is in pretty much everyone's 401ks, because there's rules around diversification and needing these kinds of index funds in 401ks. So we're all going to be SpaceX owners if you have a 401k or an index fund. We're all going to be OpenAI owners, whether we really want to or not. Index funds are so great because they give you diversification, but like the downside is that you have to take everything. You don't get to pick and choose. But you would think with AI, like they would come up with a technology where you could pick and choose, where I could go to AI and say, hey, these are my morals, create a bot that buys stock that mimics an index fund like the S&P 500, but just doesn't have companies that violate these moral guidelines that I have. That's what I would be working on if I was more entrepreneurial. I'm sure somebody out there is, because that seems like a cool tool. Someone said, did someone shadow ban me? I did get a notification from TikTok that like they weren't gonna push this out. I don't know why. I don't know what I did. Anyway, so if you're on TikTok, sorry you can't see me. Maybe if I stream more on TikTok, that'll be fixed. All right, but anyway, if you're not on TikTok, you can probably still see me. So I'm just gonna keep going, and this will all get posted in the end somewhere. Okay. Oh, why so many ads? So many ads. Oh, this is a story that I want to talk about. Oh, this is so annoying though. This ad. Seattle LGBTQ advocates rally for a civil emergency declaration as more trans people relocate to city for safety. So it's Pride Month. So we're going to be talking about the LGBTQ community, but unfortunately, what the big story in housing and LGBTQ is that the places that have the best protections for LGBTQ people have some of the highest housing costs. Cities like Seattle, San Francisco, New York, even Atlanta, they call that like the Black gay Mecca. Anyway, all these places have gotten so much more expensive to live in. And the places that are cheap tend to be more rural, they tend to be more in the middle of the country. And those places, have experienced a loss in LGBTQ protections for obvious reasons. Hopefully we can all read the political news to see what's going on there, but it creates like this real crisis, because housing, if you can't afford to live in a place that is safe, then you are unsafe, right? So this is why housing issues are just so fundamental to all issues, including social issues like LGBTQ issues, because where you live is so impactful on like just your everyday life. And if you can't afford to live somewhere that you're safe, then that is really a failure of policy in these cities that supposedly, or that in some ways are very good at protecting their LGBTQ members. They have such a high barrier to entry that they are making it more dangerous for people because they're not providing housing for the other people who might want to live there. Okay, I'm going to move on because this just keeps flashing ads. It's really annoying. Okay, the other big story this week in housing and national intelligence, don't get to say that too often, is that the Federal Housing Finance Agency head, Bill Pulte, has been tapped to serve as acting intelligence director. Tulsi Gabbard was the former intelligence director. She stepped down, and President Trump appointed our number one housing guy to replace her. Now, there's so many things to say about this. Like, one, what does housing have to do with national intelligence? Am I qualified to be a spy now because I'm in housing? Can I be a spy? I don't want to be a spy, but just like I don't understand how the experience transfers. And then this person in particular, Bill Pulte, he actually was doing some alleged spying when he was in charge of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, as chair of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, because he was the guy that was pulling the loan documents of Federal Reserve Board Governor, first Black woman Federal Reserve Board Governor Lisa Cook, to stir up a controversy and get her fired. He did the same thing to some other political enemies of President Trump. So I guess in that sense, he is a spy, alleged spy, right? I gotta say alleged. I don't know if I have to say alleged, but that's literally what happened. Like, you can go read the news. He pulled the loan documents of Lisa Cook. I know Lisa Cook because I look up to Lisa Cook. She is a Black woman economist. There aren't many of them. She was the first to be appointed to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. When she was appointed, she was so maligned by people who thought that she was unqualified because they said it was DEI, even though, you could point to so many other governors who don't even have, like, so many people in the Fed don't even have a PhD in economics. Jerome Powell did not have a PhD in economics. Lisa Cook did. So how is she less qualified? How is she not qualified? Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, everyone's saying she was unqualified. She had a really tough hearing, and then she got confirmed. And then Bill Pulte started going after her, looking into her loan documents, saying that she said that a second home was a primary home, even though that could have just been a mistake that the loan officer made, even though there was no evidence that she profited from that classification in any way. I remember when I was moving from Seattle to Wisconsin, where I live now, I still owned my Seattle house. And I remember getting the mortgage for the house I was about to buy and talking to my loan officer and saying, do I need to call this a second home or a primary home? And he said, doesn't matter. That's what he told me. He said the mortgage rate would be the same either way. Now, since then, they did change the rules a little bit so that second home mortgages do have higher fees than primary home mortgages. But I'm pretty sure this happened later on and doesn't even manifest. But basically what I'm saying is that this designation, it sounds like it's so official, second home, primary home. My loan officer said it didn't matter, but that was in 2020. So I don't know. It's just such a farce. And now this guy is going to be acting director of national intelligence. And he's going to have to do the job of being the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency at the exact same time. So we'll see how that goes. What the other news that Bill Pulte did for the Federal Housing Finance Agency is that he bought $200 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities at the direction of President Trump in order to get mortgage rates down. Mortgage rates fell, I want to say 20 basis points when that happened, but they went up 50 basis points when the Strait of Hormuz closed. So it didn't really buy us that much. Anyway, that's what I know about Bill Pulte. It's obviously I don't really like the guy. I don't really like him. He's my age. We're both 37. I'm about to turn 38. Anyway, enough about him. Okay, here's this other just interesting story that's just kind of offbeat. But this guy, his name is, what is his name? His name is Mittal Gandhi. He lives near data centers in Northern Virginia. And at first he was kind of annoyed by them, but then he got this great idea. How about we get the whole entire community together and we can sell all of our land to more data center developers? He figured he could get a price of $4.4 million per acre. So he's going around trying to convince all of his neighbors to sell their homes for 4 times the average price of property of those homes. I mean, I think this is an interesting, what do you say, would you rather kind of thing? Would you sell your home for 4 times its value to a data center? Would I? Man, I don't know. I don't know. I got kids that go to the local school. We're kind of already established in this community that we live in. It'd be really hard to uproot and move somewhere else. But for 4 times the value of my home, imagine what I could do with all that money. Imagine. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Let me know in the comments. Would you sell your house for 4 times its Redfin estimate to a data center provider? All right, speaking of chat, let's go back to the chat. What do you think about BuzzFeed? Oh, BuzzFeed was sold to, I saw him on The Breakfast Club. I don't remember his name, but he's this black media mogul, right? Is that who it was sold to? No, he bought something else, didn't he? Who was BuzzFeed sold to? Oh, Byron Allen. Yeah, okay. Yeah, BuzzFeed sold to Byron. I was right. Black media mogul Byron Allen. He's going around buying up a bunch of stuff. He's kind of you see David Ellis news about David Ellison buying up all these media companies. Byron Allen is now too. I honestly don't get it. I think the future of media is what we're doing right now. Why do you need BuzzFeed? Why do you need Paramount Plus when you could just open up your app and watch somebody on any platform you want, and it's driven by the creator instead of a name brand. So, if I had $1 billion, I would definitely not buy BuzzFeed. How much was it sold for? 120. If I had $1 billion, yeah, right. If I had $120 million, I would not buy BuzzFeed. I guess it's not. Maybe $120 million is cheap to Byron Allen, but that seems like I just can't foresee it going up in value, because who cares? Who cares about BuzzFeed? It's like buying Blockbuster, right? Like, it's just name brand name brand has some value and some inherent value, because I know what Blockbuster is. It's, if you're in a Blockbuster ad, it would stick in my mind in a way that some nameless thing wouldn't. But yeah. Anyway, someone asked, what would I buy right now? What would I buy right now? This is not financial advice. Disclosure. Oops, I need to tap that. Somebody put in the chat this company that is doing the thing I wanted to do, which is an AI that customizes, customizes index funds to your specific moral taste. That's a company that I would invest in if I wasn't, diversification pilled. I think any company that is addressing the issues of AI is worth a look. If they have like a actual viable plan to address the issues, like I was just listening to that Hollywood podcast. What is it called? From Puck. Not the Ringer. I can look it up. What's it called? What's this podcast called? It's the guy that was on the studio. The Town. I was listening to The Town because it's like Hollywood nostalgia for me to tap into what's happening there, even though I live thousands of miles away. And I was listening to The Town, and they were talking to this AI company that is creating technology so that actors can have say over where their likeness is used with AI. They have like a green light, red light, yellow light policy, where like green light is like, go ahead, but you have to pay me. Yellow is actually, no, green is go ahead, do it. Yellow is you can do it, but talk to my agent. And red is no, absolutely not, no AI. So I'll just put it up here just so you can see this podcast if anybody wants to check it out. It's one of my favorites. That's what they're talking about over on the most recent episode of The Town. Is this Hollywood's first practical solution to control AI? I don't know if it'll work. I would have to get into it with them to understand if this is actually going to work, if this is actually a viable way to protect artists. But I think any technology company that is in the business of making AI into something that people would actually want to participate and engage with, instead of just this uncontrollable plague. That's what the most. That's not my. I don't think it's a plague, but I know some people think it's a plague. Anything that makes it seem less plague-like, I think people are going to want to engage with. So that's what I would be betting on. And if you're asking about real estate, what would I buy? I already bought where I bought. I live in Wisconsin. I'm bullish on Wisconsin. The winters are cold, but it's beautiful weather right now. It's more climate resilient than the West Coast. The reason I left Seattle was because of the air quality, because there kept being wildfires, and the smoke was just such a bummer for me personally. I think other people maybe are able to tolerate that kind of thing, but I just couldn't tolerate it. I would definitely trade negative 30-degree weather, because at least you can go outside and you can breathe in the fresh air even when it's freezing cold. But if there's a wildfire, you just can't do that. So I guess I'm bullish on the Midwest with some caveats, because you got to think about the infrastructure. You got to think about other disasters. We have tornadoes, so that'll take your house down. But you hear the siren, you go to the basement. So it's not impacting my daily psyche the way that 2 weeks of wildfire smoke impacts me. Someone asked if I would buy SpaceX. No, I would not. But that's not financial advice. I don't buy individual stocks, period. So maybe that's like a super bias. Every economist is like this. They're like, don't buy individual stock. I remember when I was working at Amazon, realizing that all of my coworkers were holding their stock, which is like the exact opposite of what every economist would tell you, is you don't hold stock in the company you're working for, because if the company goes under, you are both out of a job and your savings are worthless. Like, this is what happened to Enron. And the stock kept going up in Amazon. They made money. Good for them. I think it's flattened out since then. But it's just like an investing rule. It's like one of these rules of thumb that, like, if you're trying to reduce your risk, maximize your return, do not hold stock in the company that you work for. All right. What about Florida with the property tax being eliminated? I think that's a bad idea. Where's Henry George at? Let's bring it back up. Henry George. This is when I get on my. This is gonna be a recurring thing. I'm gonna bring him up every time I get on my land value tax bandwagon. Okay. Well, this isn't even about Henry George. Maybe this is about Florida climate change. Just to get some imagery going. So Florida is going to have some problems. Let's put it that way. They're going to have a lot of problems to deal with. What are they up to the challenge? Are they going to be able to adapt their way out of these climate challenges that are coming for them? Maybe there's a future where Miami is like this Venice-like city in the water, and it's a technological miracle what happened in Florida and how they overcame the challenge of climate change. That's going to be expensive. It's still going to be expensive. So I guess what I would say is that I do not necessarily think that is a foregone conclusion that home values in Florida go down, but maintenance is going to go up, property tax is going to go up, insurance is going to go up. And they're trying to cap property taxes, which means that local municipalities will not have the funding or as much funding to do community level climate change mitigation. So things that communities can do, they can clear wildfire brush. Florida has wildfires in the northern Florida. They actually are a wildfire hotspot. They can create waterways to divert water away from homes to areas where the water won't do as much damage. They can invest in their public infrastructure. They can update their roads. They can just do public works that make climate change less costly to the people who live in those communities. But if they're not raising property taxes, where are they going to get the money to do that? And that means that more of the adaptation to climate change will have to fall on individual homeowners. And the way it falls on them is through higher insurance costs and higher maintenance costs. So if Florida thinks that they're like helping out homeowners by doing this property tax exemption, they're not doing that. They're saying, like, homeowners, we're not doing any kind of collective, the homeowners that are better off help subsidize the homeowners that are worse off, taxation redistribution. Everyone's on their own. You're all taking this risk in yourself. We're not even going to mandate that you have insurance, probably. They haven't done this yet, but there's this bill in the Florida state legislature that would make it so that you could still get a mortgage with insurance that only covers your mortgage but doesn't cover you personally. So in the event that your home is destroyed, the bank is paid, but you're just like set free, figure it out, no equity, no nothing. So that's the direction that Florida is kind of moving in. And California, let's bring up California climate change. In California, they also have their own challenges, but they are doing like the exact opposite of Florida. And you could argue that they're going way too far in the opposite direction, because what they have is the Fair Housing Plan. I talked about this in my last live stream, which is a insurer of last resort for homeowners that have been kicked off of their insurance. And they also have price caps on insurance companies. And they also mandate that insurance companies cannot do forward-looking models for setting insurance rates. They can only look at historical disaster data when setting insurance rates. So in California, they are essentially creating an insurance system where more and more people are getting pushed onto California's FAIR plan, which is the government-run insurance program, because the private insurers can't make enough money to stay in business in California, so they leave California, and more people are on this state-run insurance. That's the trajectory they're headed to. And what's wrong with that is that if you own if you own a home, it doesn't have to be old. If you own a home in a place with extremely high fire risk, sea level rise risk, etc., it is probably in your best interest to not be in that home. And the only way that you get a signal about that not being in your interest to own that home is through something like insurance costs. Your insurance costs go up because the insurers are modeling that your fire risk is increasing and they won't be able to cover you, so you have to pay more in order to get the privilege of coverage. You get this signal that it costs more, can't afford your insurance, you sell your house, you move. This means that fewer people end up living in these most climate vulnerable areas. And as a society, we're better able to adapt because people naturally move out of the riskiest areas into the places with the less risk. So, like, we have to have some kind of middle ground where people, for the most part, pay market rate insurance. But when they can't afford the market rate insurance, there are affordable, safe housing options waiting for them to move into that hopefully allow them to stay connected to the communities in the best case scenario. If it's an entire community, maybe you relocate the entire community. Although I know that that's been really tough. It's a very, very challenging problem. But it's coming. It's coming, and just capping insurance rates doesn't mean it's any less likely to come. Capping property tax doesn't mean it's any less likely to come. It just means when it comes, it's going to be more expensive and we're going to have less resources to address it. Okay, that's enough about that. All right. What? I think taxes should be eliminated after you pay your property off, if you ask me. No. Just because you paid off your mortgage doesn't mean that you are no longer a member of society. Being a member of society, of your community, means that you have to pay into the schools, you have to pay into the roads, you have to pay into the police, the firefighters. Most local municipalities get their money from property taxes. Like, that's their primary source or their only source. And if you say once you pay your mortgage off, you don't have to pay property tax anymore, like what does that mean? You are, what's the opposite of annex? You recede from your community. You like aren't a member of your city anymore because, or your municipality, because you paid off your mortgage. You get your own little kingdom once your mortgage is paid off, where you're the king and you get to set all the laws. No, that's not how that works. You pay property taxes. Property taxes are good. Taxes are good because they help us get to a more optimal place in our economy and society. We get to pay for things that benefit everybody when we pay taxes, and we get to encourage the type of economic behavior that creates a more stable and better economy and society. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop ranting about property taxes. Both states use last resort insurance. Oh, somebody said Florida has last resort insurance. That's probably true. I gotta do more research, but thank you for pointing that out, that Florida has its own last resort. I'm getting all on California for their last resort insurance. But I guess what I would say is, how is Florida going to pay for that if they're not raising property taxes? They already have they don't have state income tax, right? Or it's super low. So they have to rely on sales tax. You know who sales tax falls on? The people with the lowest incomes end up paying the largest share of their income in tax when it's sales tax, because they are consumers and not savers. Sales tax means that savers don't have to spend as much on taxes, but spenders do. And tourists, I guess, but you got to have I think that there's probably a limit on how much tourists will pay. Maybe, okay, I'm gonna give this some credence here. Maybe Florida is betting that it is going to be the most desirable vacation destination in a climate change world, because whatever problems Florida has, the Caribbean, the entire tropical belt, they're going to have those problems too. And maybe Florida thinks that they're going to keep getting more and more tourists as people decide, instead of vacationing in Puerto Rico, I'm going to start saying Puerto Rico or Jamaica or, the Maldives, they're going to go to Florida because Florida has the resources to address climate change better than these other tropical vacation destinations would. I could see that argument. I could also see people leaving those countries and wanting to move to Florida if Florida is handling it better. But they have to handle it better in the first place. And I'm not convinced of that. But maybe that's plausible. I'm gonna put that in the plausible category, that Florida somehow is able to get all of their tax revenue from tourists. They build this tourism destination that gets all the tourists that would have come to the Caribbean to go to Florida instead. And there is this Florida utopia that exists in the future. Maybe. I wouldn't bet on it. Okay. Let's see. Any other comments we got here? All right. So what's the best way for millennials to save/invest in retirement? Mid-30s currently renting. Max out your 401k, max out your Roth IRA, or your IRA if you qualify for that. Those are your tax subsidized investment accounts. If you have kids, put money into the 529 accounts for their college savings, because those are also subsidized. Although I guess it like kind of counts against financial aid, so I guess if you're really going to be gaming the system, maybe look into that before you do that. But anyway, max out your subsidized accounts, and then after that, I'd still buy index funds. I'd still just do index funds because you get diversification. There's this economist Professor Pollock. He's a Chicago economist, and his whole thing was that you can put all financial advice on a postcard. You don't need, a PhD. You don't need a book. You read a whole book. You don't need to take any courses. It's just like max out your tax advantage savings accounts, including health savings accounts. Invest in index funds, and as you get older, you like move the money out of stocks and into bonds and then into cash. But they have time dated index funds that do that automatically for you. I forget what it was on the postcard. Let me bring up the postcard. Oh, the index card. Here it is. Hey, why is this such low res? All right, where is it? Down here. Okay. Max out your 401k or equivalent employee contribution by inexpensive, that means low fee, well-diversified mutual funds, like those Vanguard funds. Do not buy any individual securities. The other person on the side of the table knows more than you. That's why I was saying I don't actually buy it. That's why I won't buy SpaceX, because I don't buy individual stock. I follow these rules. Save 20% of your money. That's just a rule of thumb. That probably is very case by case. So I think that one's, yeah. All right. Pay your credit card balance in full every month. Yes, do that. Maximized tax advantage saving vehicles. We talked about that. 529 accounts. Pay attention to fees. Yeah. See, I have some ESG funds that are index funds because they do follow this like more ethical, although not perfectly ethical, investment strategy, but they do cost more in fees. So that's the downside of caring. Okay. Make financial advisors commit to the fiduciary standard. Okay. If you follow rules 1 through 7, you don't need a financial advisor. But if you are a person who struggles with saving because like it's like overeating, like you're an overspender and you need somebody to be your financial coach, don't hire a financial coach, hire a financial advisor, because they have to commit to a fiduciary standard. A financial coach can sell you like stuff that is a waste of money just so that they make all the money. But a financial advisor, they have to legally not do that. They have to legally work in your best interest. So that's why if you're going to take advice from somebody, take advice from a financial advisor, not some coach you found on TikTok. And then promote social insurance programs to help people when things go wrong. Yes. I think that this does, you might say that this doesn't belong on the index card, but I think it does. I think it does because, well, there's a lot of reasons why. But even if you're a purely selfish person, when everybody else is getting the bare minimum, they're less likely to commit crimes against you, right? So if you want to fight crime, fight poverty. Okay. Anyway, if your employer offers a 401k with matching, put as much as you can. Yes. Yes. Ditto to that. All right. What else is in the comments? What do I think about life insurance? I got life insurance when I had my first kid because I was worried about this scenario where I died and then my family would be left without a earner and how that could impact my kids. So I think life insurance is fine. I know there's like this thing on TikTok where like they say that you can do something that rich people do to get life insurance so you don't have to spend your stock or something like that. I don't. It's on the index card. I don't do that. I don't do that. What do you think about 529 versus custodian? I don't know. I'm not. I can't answer that question. I just don't know enough. I have a 529 account. I don't know. I didn't research it that much. I just bought whatever the state sponsored one was. Yes, if your community falls apart, then your home value goes to nothing. That's why you should want to pay property taxes, because your property taxes get invested in public things that make your community more valuable. People want to live in neighborhoods with higher rated schools. So you pay money for property tax for the schools are better, your home goes up in value. People want to live in places with beautiful parks and well-maintained roads and communities that are safe, where ambulances come on time and firefighters fight the fires. And that's what the whole LA election is boiling down to, is were the property taxes going to fund the firefighters to do a good enough job to justify how high property taxes are? So if you got to fund the things that help protect your property value. Even if you are a purely selfish property value maximizer, you should still want to pay property taxes. All right. Oh, I'm over time. I gotta go. But thank you so much for coming to my live. Sorry, I keep hitting the mic. Thank you for coming. I will be doing this every week that I am not sick or on vacation. So I do intend to do this again Thursday, 3:00 Eastern time, 2 Central. I'm Daryl Fairweather, Redfin's chief economist, author of Hate the Game, and I'll see you next time.